Hello everyone, my name is Jesper. I'm living in Norway, and I'm making this video with the two kind of different intentions in mind. Part of it is I'm doing a training course at Harvard, which is called Leadership, Organizing and Action, and I'm making this video for people who have supported me to be able to do that. We're about 60% on the crowdfunder to cover the tuition fee for this. So I'm making this for all of you who have supported me so generously. And I'm also making this video as a preparation for a meeting. We're gonna have a workshop in a few days time, which is about the importance of aligning on a shared theory of change. So I hope we can fit both those intentions in one video. And yeah, so let's go. So to start off with, there are many research shows that I'll come back to also, that most of the social movement organizations and social movements that challenge the status quo, whether it's climate or racial justice or social inequality or women's topics and issues, most of them fail to change the status quo. But there are, because there are many interests who wants to keep things as they are. But there are some that are able to do that, and those that do usually seems that the research shows that they have an alignment around the shared theory of change. Okay, so what is the theory of change? This picture is a common illustration to show that. Is usually you have a goal that you want to do, like within the campaign we're doing. We want to stop that the Norwegian government stop issuing new oil licenses. But it might be other things in terms of equality or justice or yeah, whatever it is. So people usually know what they want in the long term, and then they have some sense of what they want to do now, whether it's lobbying, writing to members of parliament, doing petition, or is with I'm and others are working on, which is civil resistance or using civil disobedience as a way to pressure, create the political will to take action on an issue. But the missing part in the middle, where it says a miracle needs to occur, is usually the challenge. How do you get from some activities and tactics into actually achieving the goal? And that's what the theory of change helps to map out and navigate. So we're gonna look at a bit of a longer definition from the Center of Theory of Change about this, which says that a theory of change is essentially a comprehensive description and illustration of how and why a desired change is expected to happen in a particular context. It is focused in particular on mapping out or filling in what has been described as the missing middle that we just spoke about, between what a program or change initiative does, its activities, interventions, or tactics, and how these lead to the desired goal being achieved. So it does that by defining the long-term goals and then working backwards, which is also called backwards mapping, to identify all the conditions and outcomes that must be in place and how they relate to each other for the goals to occur. So it has a very, mapping out all of this. So now we're gonna go to some one for me key reference point in this, which is Engler. I share more about him, and then we're going to look at what does the research on different theories of change say about having a shared, or what happens if you don't have a shared theory of change, and then look at 2 examples. So Paul Engler is a man who, together with his brother, wrote This is an Uprising, which is a book about how to combine the tradition of reformist gradual organizing, which is, he calls the structured tradition, like union organizing and community organizing, together with mass movement. So how can you do it, have enough of organization together with lots of people participating and having more radical demands, basically. So what does social movement practice and research show about why alignment on the theory of change is important? So this is a quote from a talk, and I'll share the link to the video in the description. And what he says here, this is a quote from a 2-hour two videos which is 1 hour each, is one of his great mentors from the Serbian revolution that managed to get, together with others, Slobodan Milosevic, the dictator, to be removed from power. He came to the US and visited different movements, and Paul Engler was telling him about all the internal fights that is happening within the movement. And he shared that the majority of all fights in the movement is because people are actually not aligned around the same theory of change. So he says that all these debates that are happening is because people don't actually share the same basic understanding of how change happens. Once you get alignment around that, tons of the problems are fixed, because people aren't debating other theories of change internally within the organization. Oh no, we shouldn't do it like that, we should do it like that. Because there's a basic difference in understanding. And then he goes on to say that other theories of change are legitimate. Let's say you have the kind of Amnesty, who does a lot of lobbying theory of change on how they do petitions. They do some kind of grassroots petitions, signing, and local groups. But then they are a lot about kind of lobbying the government and making reports. And that's a certain theory of change, while civil resistance campaign has a quite different theory of change. So he says the different theories of change are all important, but a movement needs, and a movement organization needs to be built around a shared theory of change. Countercultures are built around countercultural theories of change, and there can be a good way on how these relate within, like, for say, the climate movement, how different organizations can support and amplify each other's work, which they call social movement ecology. But then again, emphasizing your movement has to be clear about what its theory of change is. So maybe last thing to say is also Paul Engler, together with others in the called Ajni Institute, AYNI, they have been coaching and mentoring social movement organizations across the globe in hundreds of different organizations, and they have kind of also seen some of the common issues and problems that social movement organizations face. So that's also why I feel he has a lot to say, and some really good points. So moving on. So research on theories of change. Well, then one might say maybe it's fine to just have multiple theories of change. Can't we just have these kind of lobbying theory of change together with a more action on the street based theory of change? So research on this shows you can have multiple theories of change within an organization, but which is basically having non-alignment around it. But there's always 2 points of tensions. How are resources allocated, and the evaluation of the project if it's actually being successful. So we'll come back to that, but just briefly to say that, like, if some people in the organization think that we should do lobbying, they will want to have resources and time and money and people focused on that, while as if others are thinking it's much more important that we do actions that are visible in the public, then they will want to have the resources allocated mainly to that, and then you have a fight or a tension about who gets which resources. And then at the end of a campaign, these two different groups will have a different evaluation if it was successful, because they have different criteria on what tells us creating the change needed and in what way. So all right, so let's go into next part, which is about scaling. So this is some insights coming from a paper that was published, I think it was in 2015, by Moore and Riddell in Canada, from a foundation that had been working on social initiatives and how to scale them. And I'll put a link to the video, to the article in the video below. So basically what they said is that when there is something that is working or that one wants to expand, one usually uses this word of scaling. And usually, or what they found was that there are 3 different kinds of, primarily different kinds of scaling that is required for a project to be able to be lasting and impactful. But what usually is that when one thinks about scaling, it's about scaling out, impacting greater numbers. You get more people involved in the organization, you recruit more people, you get more people in working groups, you have more funding, so on and so forth. And that's very important. But in order, and then what one wants to do with that is to scale up. So one can see it's like having seeds. You are scaling out, you want to have activities in more cities and more people involved. And that's all well and good. And with that activity, you want to scale up. You want to impact laws and policy. So it's like a tree. You're planting these trees around the place, and you want them to grow up and tall and impact the kind of the political weather, the cultural understanding of the issue that you're working on, and through that changing institutions. But the last part, which is the least explored, or maybe part that hasn't been happening as much, is the scaling deep. So what they mean with that is impacting the cultural roots of the situation or the issue that one is working on, and changing relationships, values and beliefs, and the hearts and minds of people. And for me, I also in this put what is in order to be steady and strong, if you're going to be a tall tree, you need strong roots, and it's also to kind of draw the nourishment from to what you're going to do. And if you don't have that strong root and there is a wind coming, it will blow you over. And in especially civil resistance campaigning, there is a lot of strong wind, and people are aggressive and are working very strongly against what you're doing. So that's it. This is very important. So for me, this part of scaling deep is about giving people the skills in order to do the scaling out, recruitment, working together, and to be able to scale up. You need skills, you need to have a support system. When you're doing these, both scaling out and scaling up are outwards facing activities. But in order to have the inner strength and the inner alignment with a group of people, you need to scale deep, you need to build trust, you need to build relationships with these people. Additionally, to deepen into kind of the tradition of organizing that you are a part of, and that you can draw learnings and knowledge from, because most of the initiatives actually fail to challenge the status quo in a good way. So we need to do things differently, and that is through scaling deep. And so example 1. So a very common, and this is applied to civil resistance campaigning because that's what I'm working on, and this has been my experience also within the last few years when I've been working on this, that the most common theory of change, or unspoken understanding usually of people involved, is that it is the actions that are the most important aspect of a campaign. So a majority of the resources, let's say 40% of the time and focus, are allocated to planning for actions, preparing for actions, doing action training, doing the actions themselves, and other and such. And then other aspects of campaigning, like doing outreach and mobilization activities, maybe also gets a lot of focus and in this example. And then the organizing people, having a more internally focused activity, has much less focus. Doing the skill training, doing the scaling deep, where people get the skills for how to do outreach, how to do media activities in different ways, how to be regenerative in one's involvement, how to deepen into the philosophy of nonviolence in this case, or the basic organizational skills like facilitation, coordination, introductory workshops, and having peer-to-peer coaching support with others. So in summary, this example of scaling out and scaling up maybe gets the most of the resources, maybe 80% in this case, which are both outwards facing activities, trying to recruit people and doing actions to create debate on the issue. And the more internally focused activities of scaling deep, or organizing people, as we'll go on to see how other people, some research defines this, gets maybe 20% in this case. So this is one way of of how it happens. And then we'll look at another way on how resources are allocated, and then how they are actually two different theories of change. So in example 2, research on social movements from Han and others from 2021 in Prisons of the People, which I started reading, I haven't finished it. Says that most of social movement organizations that set out to challenge the status quo fail. But there are outliers and exceptions to the rule that actually achieve that legislative change. So why I want to include that is we can't just, if we're actually going to win what we need to do, we can't go on just kind of common sense or hunch on how to do the scaling out, the scaling up, and the scaling deep, because the common kind of culture around it fails statistically. So we need to learn the craft. We need to deepen and develop craft in what we do. We need to build that capacity, which is what these outliers do. So one of the things that differentiate these outliers is that they don't only do mobilization, but they're also focusing on organizing. And this is a quote from the book, from a movement in the US. The organizers thus make two strategic choices. 1, to engage others. 2, to invest in their development. The mobilizers only make the first choice. And this is also based on another book from 2014, which is called How Organizations Developed Activists. And that's kind of a basis for the Prisms of the People. Prisms of the People have more really incredible, interesting points on how they do that, but we'll not get into them right now. So another quote, just to kind of see how they differentiate between mobilization or mobilizers and organizers. So mobilizers, their strategy for building power is by building membership. So having more people sign up to do things, and they usually just take people where they are. They don't require them to do much. Maybe they are require them to do a training, but it's a low ask usually. And the strategy for building that membership is by getting as many people to take action and to build a bigger and more targeted project list that you can draw on through with the later waves of the campaign. So in contrast, organizers, their strategy for building power is build power by building leadership, transform the motivations and capacities of members to take on more leadership. So building that leadership capacity, skill is a key focus. And their strategy for building membership is by developing leadership who can engage others and constantly develop leadership among new participants or prospects. So when new people are, it's not holding that kind of practice of leadership just in the people who are maybe in a central decision-making body, but you're all the time when new people are, you're trying to create a distributed leadership structure and culture within the organization. So how this can look then, a theory change like this would maybe balance the resources in a way that is more proportional between the different ways of scaling. So more doing the proportionality between scaling out, doing the mobilization to recruit people to take part in the organizational activities, supported financially, so on and so forth. The scaling up, doing the actions on sites and the media, outwards facing media activities, which can be called media actions. and doing the scaling deep. So doing constantly creating standards for leadership development in the organizations, doing skill trainings, having peer-to-peer coaching, so people can not just doing lots of things, but actually aligning, is this working, is it not, what do I need, and having that space of reflection to actually reflect intentionally, what am I doing, how is it working, how is it not working, what can I do differently. So that's the focus of coaching, and deepening into the kind of tradition or principles and philosophy of nonviolence. And additionally, which is something that is usually deprioritized, is the emotional work of honoring the pain of living in this age of extinction. And this draws a lot on the work of now I'm forgetting the name, looking up here, anyhow, sorry about that. The work that reconnects is the name of the work, and I'm just had a mind blackout a bit of the name of the person who has done it. Anyhow, she recognized that a lot of kind of anger and frustration and outrage comes out in these kind of progressive organization campaigns, because people are not knowing how to do the emotional work of actually honoring that pain, and having a way to process that. So then it comes out into in a disrespectful way to the opposition usually, or maybe internally also. It creates a lot of tensions when that kind of pressure is on. So in this way, maybe the resource allocation between scaling out and up and scaling deep could be more equal. It does require much more resources to do scaling deep activities than to focus on kind of mobilizing and actions. But again, coming back to what does the research say, we want what we do to have the maximum likelihood to actually achieve what we want. And then we need to look at what are other people doing. And maybe one just kind of imagery metaphor for this for me is if you've ever planted seeds in the spring, which you want to plant out in the garden later on. If you put the light too far high, then the plant will grow very tall. It will grow up. It will kind of try to scale up too quickly, and then once and it won't have time to sufficiently create a sturdy, stable root structure. And once you put that plant out in the soil, it's not stable. It doesn't have support to actually continue scaling up and being strong. So then first the wind gust and it will fall over. So in this way, the metaphor for me is that if we put a lot of focus on trying to spread out, have more people joining, have more people involved, and trying to scale up without actually scaling deep, will very easily be taken by the first, or doesn't need to be much tension or problems within the organizations or what the opposition does that will actually make you kind of collapse in some way, or people will feel worn out. So that's why I want to speak about this. So coming back to this how are resources allocated. In the first example, if people have that kind of area change, they will evaluate and they will say, okay, we need most of the activity, most of the focus on in terms of actions and mobilization. That needs to have almost all the resources we have available. But in the second example, the resources need to be allocated into creating that scaling deep, creating that skills, those social ties in the group, so they actually feel like a group, not they know each other, and they have support and have the skills, not just the action skills, but actually once the campaign is finished, they have gained more resources, deepen their own capacity to be involved in this kind of organizing and campaigning, rather than just coming for an action and then doing lots of things and then feeling kind of depleted afterwards. So that's why it's very important to have a shared theory of change. Yeah, I hope that was helpful, and please put a comment on the video if there's something you appreciated or something that you would like to see more resources on. Yeah, I hope this is helpful. Thank you.